Emergence in 30 minutes, ma'ams. The Into Harm's Way's navigator called out to Captain Rochelle and Lieutenant Senior Grade Kevchak. The lieutenant looked back to Rochelle, who only gave the other woman a nod. It was her helm, her calls. Aye, navigation. Bosun, if you'll be so kind to make the call. I have an announcement for the ship. LSG Kevchak began as Rochelle turned to the display set up in front of her. Refueling station 19643 wasn't one she had visited before, but after a certain point, the standardized construction of a single station, supplied by a handful of drone ships, all bled together. This wasn't a massive assembly like the handful of still functional stations around Shill, and the core systems that sprawled kilometers in every direction, filling the skies with glowing lights and soaring drone ships carrying their volatile and precious cargo. It was almost like going out into a fresh night's snowfall at her home, and watching the glowbugs dance around a perfectly black sky after the clouds blocked out the stars. All the hours, and probably days she had spent staring into their dances and twirls, making up stories of clashing fleets and always her at the helm. A cocky captain urging her handpicked crew forward for Empress, Imperium, and emolument. "Oh, what the years have taken from me," the Imperium's old lady whispered in her head, "to drain even laughter from my throat." There used to be romance in command when she started off as a fresh-faced lieutenant, serving under a competent enough captain and a taskmistress of a watchkeeper. She would smile and laugh with her crews, but as she rose through the ranks, becoming the next bosun and then watchkeeper, the pressures mounted. One couldn't be seen fraternizing with the enlisted. It brought down morale, made it harder to ensure command. One could not hand out efficiency wages with any sense of fairness if the one you were handing them to were those you met off shift for drinks. You could not order soldiers to die if you met them for drinks and knew their joys and woes. And so she grew distant out of choice, snubbing those whom she would previously embrace. She heard her crew whisper her increase in rank came with a new heart, one made of frozen clay. But then when the ship rocked and systems flashed damage, when the captain fell from a piece of shrapnel to the neck, and when she was in charge, that very same iron will and frozen clay heart allowed her to order the ship back to some semblance of control, and, through bleeding her crew and ship, she had ripped a semblance of victory from the jaws of defeat, as the true crown pirates fled the convoy she was tasked with protecting. But the men in those vulnerable ships got home, and what was left of her crew sung the previous insult as praise. "Clay-hearted Rochelle," they sang, as they marched off the tattered and broken ship, headed for a replacement vessel, as a medal was pinned to her chest, and a captain's stripe was added to her uniform. A sharp whistle brought the former fleet admiral, now captain, out of her thoughts, as the boatswain brought her fingers away from her tusks and called into the bridge-mounted radio. "Hear me, hear me. The deck officer is about to speak." "Another day, another jump. Oh, how these used to be beautiful," Rochelle mused to herself. The sound of a sharp and familiar whistle came over the speakers, and the call of the boatswain to stand ready cut through the smiles the two men secretly shared in a small bunkroom with a locking door. Cookie looked up and cocked his head, listening as a woman he vaguely remembered being called Kevchak announced that the ship would be falling out of phase in half an hour, and that all crews should move to assigned duty stations. He turned back to Slivers and smiled. "Don't worry, we'll talk about this once we're back on break." Slivers gave a slight snort. "Yes, duty calls. Ryan," he tried, the name coming out filled with a harsh accent. Ryan smiled back and then gave him a pat on the shoulder. "All right, let's move." "Emergence in 3, 2, 1. We have left phase." The navigational officer reported as the jolt of a gravity bubble dispersing filtered through the crew. Rochelle swayed lightly on her feet, allowing the old friend of phase travel to flow through her without issue. "All ships reporting in, green across the board. Cargoes 1 through 6 all report clean phase bubbles, and their systems are already cycling for refueling." There was a pause in the communication officer's reporting as she sighed. "And it seems that," she groaned again, "the noble and kind lady of the ship and captain of the good vessel Empress's Love has requested more time in system. Apparently her spar doesn't work right in phase." It took everything in Lieutenant Senior Grade Kevchak's considerable, no longer fresh out of the Academy's patience, to not scream, and froze something at the news that the convoy's current pain in the ass, and highest-ranking noble within 16 systems, had just made a polite request to delay the convoy. Again. If the Honourable Captain Rochelle wasn't watching over her and testing her, she would most likely say something snide, snarky, maybe a little crass in order to break the tension. Why does she need a spa? With all the hot air she blows, she should be able to turn any room into a sauna. LSG Kevchak turned her head around to glare at the Marine, who suddenly realised her helmet wasn't set to internal communications only. As the Marine's NCO turned to face the outspoken soldier and pointed down, LSG Kevchak turned back to the communications officer. Time until contact with the refueling station? Even if the noble and kind lady wished more time in system, there is no reason we have to spend that time with empty tanks. The last statement was done with a questioning tone, and she waited a brief moment for Captain Rochelle to contradict her. Without that contradiction, she added, "When the station contacts us, request a full refuel, and send a message asking how long the noble and kind lady wishes for us to remain. If I remember correctly, this station should have a dockyard we can use to inspect for any damage." The communications officer gave Kevchak a quick salute, as the sound of muffled grunts from a Marine doing push-ups off to the side of the bridge cut what could have been a stale silence. It took everything in LSG Kevchak's will to not rock back and forth on her feet, only the watchful gaze of Captain Rochelle keeping her steady. Behind her back, her clasped hands twitched in time to the Marine's push-ups as minutes passed. "Communications officer, we should be receiving a signal from the station, correct? Automated system should have pinged us?" she fretted. "Yes, ma'am," the communications officer, to whom she really should learn the name, replied. "We phased out with a small moon between us and the station, so perhaps that is why we didn't receive a signal. Do we have a clear line of sight for communications now?" "Yes, ma'am." LSG Kevchak paused, mulling her options over in her head. Send out a message with our identifications. Make mention we received no automated signal and request a resend. "Aye, ma'am," the communications officer replied, turning back to her station, and began to speak into a microphone. LSG Kevchak ran some quick calculations in her head. It would take about half an hour for their signal to reach the station, and another half hour for it to return. About an hour of waiting in the void, just sitting here. She nodded to herself. "Navigation? Contact the rest of the fleet and have them clear the phase point. We will be here a while, and I wouldn't want to cause another ship issue if they phase in on top of us." Behind her, Captain Rochelle cleared her throat. Lieutenant Senior Grade Kevchak, heart in her stomach, turned to face the ship's old woman. "Ma'am?" "If I may suggest," the captain began in that low, resonant voice she always used. No matter where you were on the bridge, you could hear her clearly. "You should deploy one of our communication satellites to the moon that was previously blocking us." As always, the captain's wisdom showed through. "Yes, ma'am. Sending out a communication satellite." LSG Kevchak paused. "I will also deploy an interceptor to escort. Runoff 3 is currently in the ready room. I'll deploy them." Kevchak wasn't looking back, but she hoped to the goddesses that Rochelle gave her an approving nod at that prudence. Milk leaned back in her crash seat, or as far as she could in a barely adjustable combat chair, and stared into the void of space. "I feel like I should say something," she muttered to herself. "Here I am, furthest in this direction any human has probably ever been, and I'm sitting here without anything to say." "Didn't you already give this speech a few jumps ago?" Cookie asked from up front, watching the oddly NASA-looking communication satellite fire its thrusters and enter into the beginning of a stable orbit. "I did, but it's still a speech I feel applies," Milk replied. "We're explorers of a sort. Sure, we're following someone else's well-blazed and clear trail, but we're still going further than humanity has gone. Anything we see is the first time any human has seen it. Maybe the only time." Cookie sighed and paused, tapping a finger against the control column sitting between his legs. He had been subjected to an overwhelming amount of innuendo regarding that bit of aerospacecraft design during training, and even in his head he could hear the echoes of the jokes. "How about this? I don't feel like a giant. I feel very, very small." Milk was silent for a while, pondering the quote. "Well, thanks. Now I have existential dread." Cookie laughed and activated his throat mic. "Runoff 3 to home base. Communication satellite is in orbit, and we are ready to receive further orders." "Home base to Runoff 3, we confirm your report. Stand by for further instructions." The easy voice of Veshtal, the Orange Shift communications officer, replied a minute later. Ensuring his radio was switched to not broadcast, Cookie leaned back in his seat. Stand by for further instructions. We've been standing by for half an hour already. I know it should be used to flights like this, but with the communications lag. We can't talk with home plate at all, Milk finished. I mean, we could, but it'd be a pain. And we get scolded for cluttering the channel. I swear, long-range flights out here are so much worse than back in the USN. The pair paused, staring off into the stars. The fact I have to specify that it's the US Navy I'm talking about, instead of the shill. We're even talking in trade shill, here, alone in a spaceship, Milk commented. Cookie thought for a moment before replying in English. Yeah, it feels weird speaking this after so long with trade shill as the default. I mean, it feels right, but it also feels weird. I know what you mean, Milk said in the same tongue, staring off into the stars, wondering if one of those flickering lights was Sol. Rochelle watched as the bridge NCO finally got bored of making the Marine who forgot to turn off her helmet speakers do push-ups, and idly thought to herself, remarking about the time. It has been a tad under an hour and we haven't received a broadcast from the station. Even with the moon out of the way, we should be getting something. She tapped her finger against the side of her leg, watching Lieutenant Senior Grade Kevchak admirably work through the problem at hand, trying to get all the information she could, while negotiating with the other captains, forcing them to wait. And wait they did. Her mental clock ticked over into an hour before Rochelle glanced at the video feed, from Runoff Free's video feed of the station again. Specifically, the station's core, where the main broadcasting array was set up. And she watched as the broadcasting array twitched and readjusted, responding to LSG Kevchak's order to clear the phase point. Captain Rochelle had a sinking feeling in her gut. I have the bridge, Captain Rochelle spoke, stepping forward. I have orders. Only 2 patrol ships? Covering a convoy that large? We should save something for our contact. They sent us to exactly the right point.